Hello, this is David Cobb with Cooperation Humboldt. We're working with coalition groups including Centers of Pueblo, Northwest People's Alliance, and Organized Labor as part of the right. One of the things that we've been doing locally is really deep dive on what is this historic moment, because for us, we are clear that we are in a conjuncture moment, that Donald Trump is obviously a problem, a profound problem, but a symptom of the problem. And that problem is that fascism is emerging in this country. And to really underscore our understanding, and that is that fascism is not merely totalitarianism and jackbooted thugs. Yes, that's part of it. But deeper still, fascism is a social, political, and economic system. And in order to implement that system, it actually requires a mass base. And that is why the rising number of white nationalists, the rising Proud Boys, all that we're seeing across the country is so profoundly problematic, because we are literally watching fascism emerge in this country. The basic characteristics of fascism we're all familiar with, but let's just name it. Hypernationalism, a myth of the rebirth of some former glory, a purging of others of all kinds, but especially based on ethnicity. Military spectacle and hypermasculinity. There's almost always an overt appeal to God and a use of religion as a social tool of enforcement. There's always the suppression of labor power, to the point that famous fascist dictator Mussolini said fascism should be more properly called corporatism, because it merges the military might of our nation with the economic might of our corporations. And folks, at the end of the day, remember that the underlying claim or belief is that organizing the state in this way actually benefits the working class. We know it's not true, but that is what they believe. And that is a rising level of ideology. I want to take just one moment to recognize the historic arcs of fascism. And before we talk about the fascism of the 1930s, which is where the term first arose, it really is worth naming that the Ku Klux Klan is really the original proto-fascist organization. And it's why in this country, white supremacy and fascism are so inextricably linked. It is how the others are actually defined, in fact. But fascism in the 1930s arose. One thing, remember that Adolf Hitler literally studied not only the KKK, but also the use of reservations and the conquest and the brutal subjugation of indigenous peoples on this continent, and settler colonialism that happened here as a model for what he was trying to do. But fascism as an idea arose in the 1930s because the entire society was shifting from an agrarian way of organizing political economy to an industrial way of organizing the economy. And so the idea of fascism became, this will be good for individuals within the state, and the state über alles. Fascism is arising again because our entire political economy is morphing from an industrial way of organizing the political economy to some version of laborless production because of automation, robotics, and technology. I also want to take a moment to recognize that we are in not just a crisis, but systems failure because of the global ecological crisis. It's not coming, it's here now and getting worse. There's also an economic crisis called capitalism and late-stage capitalism. And part of that crisis is because we are commodifying the earth faster than she can replenish herself. So that's an existential crisis. We are destroying the planet. That's an existential crisis. But even on economics, capitalism is coming to an end because you can no longer extract the surplus value of people's labor as profit because of technology, robotics, and automation. So the ecological crisis and economic crisis of late-stage capitalism is creating a political crisis. To be clear, this political system was never designed to solve the problem of white supremacy or wealth inequality or any of the other problems that we as social change agents concern ourselves with. I'm saying something different. I'm saying that this political system can no longer do what it's designed to do, which is simply maintain order. We are literally in a which side are you on moment. To paraphrase Rosa Luxemburg, who said it's either socialism or barbarism, I believe we're at a moment where it's either going to be some version of eco-socialism or some version of fascism. The neoliberal center cannot hold. Fascism is arising all across the globe, not just in the United States. Here in the United States, absolutely, it is a white nationalist version because that's what makes it unique here. But in other parts of the world, it's unique in different ways. At the end of the day, folks, we at Cooperation Humboldt believe ultimately we have to build a multiracial, multi-ethnic movement that recognizes our shared humanity and unite to defend each other and fight for a new world. Because I'll end with this. I'm not fighting to save this dying, toxic system. I'm fighting to create a new world.
Chapter leader of the United Federation of Teachers and the son of a UFT chapter leader. So we come to this work with many lives of frontline activity, and we're really honored to talk to and to have clips of today one of the most important union organizers, Cicely Meyer-Cruz, the president of United Teachers of Los Angeles, who's a militant activist within the National Trade Union movement. After her, you'll hear from Tanisha Grant, part of the New York City Fight for Our Lives, People Strike Local, who's also a national figure in parents, helping parents, and Black moms for Black Lives Matter. She brings a group of students and other parent community leaders that join the conversation. Then we have a roundtable, clips from a conversation from Professor Melina Abdullah, a Los Angeles-based African Studies professor, who's also one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. We have Bernard Gassaway, who is the superintendent of alternative schools here in New York City, and himself an incredible parent, student, teacher, advocate. And then we have Marvin Garcia of Chicago, one of the leaders of the alternative student movement there, and a former principal of the radical Pedro Albizu Campos High School. We end the clips with a vibrant call to action from President Cecilia Meyer-Cruz that brings us right to the present day.
As the clips make clear, it doesn't matter who wins the election. Education, K through 12, higher education, all education is a front line of struggle. From the labor issues within education, to the school to prison pipeline, to the struggle for school systems to meet the needs of children who are struggling. The speakers on the clips all make clear that we need to be ready to move towards general strike. All power to the people.
We have to hold every corporate Democrat accountable. Republicans just don't get that mark. It's everyone who is standing in the way of justice, standing in the way of what needs to happen, and really creating a social safety net for our people, right? I mean, I like to think in terms of equity, but really deep down, I really want to talk about liberation and how we get a full liberation of people. And that when we say Black Lives Matter, you know, folks are like, you know, it's like, it's inclusive of a statement. Even the Navajo Nation realizes that 87 years after a bigot says Washington Redskins, it takes this uprising right now of Black Lives Matter to realize that it's going to be called the Washington football team now. And that means that we can realize through Black Lives Matter, we can realize that dismantling of white supremacist culture of indigenous folk, right? That the Blackhawks, the Indians, the Braves, like all of those names are going to fall down when that happens. And through the Black Lives Matter movement, we will see the end of the incarceration of children, Latino children, being caged at the border. So through all of this, we are going to see some change, and that is the hope, right? Because we've got to be looking for the North Star, which is really our students. Like, I don't say that students are the future. The students are the now. Those babies are the now. And we have to realize a dream that is so radically different that it shifts the very ground that we walk on, that we change every single narrative because we must.
President Cecily Meyer Cruz, thank you very much for your wisdom, your passion, your commitment. We are so honored for you to come on the People's Right broadcast. Thank you.
Like Matt said, I am Tanisha Grant. I am the founder and CEO of Parents Supporting Parents New York. We unapologetically help parents that are marginalized, whose voices are not often heard and pushed to the side. We advocate in our communities. We help our communities as much as we can. And like Matt said, we are part of a lot of coalitions, but I will talk more about that later. I want to now pass it off to introduce Meryl to introduce yourself.
Oh, hi. I was not expecting to be called on first. Hi, I'm Meryl. I'm the founder and director of Polyfem, which is a group of young femmes. We're working because we want political power. And so, like Tanisha, you know, we're very closely together, doing organizing, planning marches and things. So I guess I'm gonna pass it.
Hey y'all, I'm Taj Sutton, President of Community Education Council in District 14. And for folks who might be unfamiliar, we basically act as a liaison between the Department of Education and local school communities. In a perfect world, we'd be able to get what our schools and our families need from the DOE. We can delve a little bit deeper into that later as to why that becomes rather difficult. I'm also an arts educator, and I run Young People of Color Incorporated, which is a grassroots collective of small business owners, creatives, teachers, parents, and students working together through advocacy and art to shift paradigms. Yeah, that's about it. And just author, advocate, all around. You know, we care about kids, everybody here. We care about kids, we care about education, and we care about the fact that folks are not getting what they need. And so that's why we do what we do. I'm going to pass it on to Naomi.
Thanks, Taj. My name is Naomi Pena. Before I always address myself, I say I'm a born and raised New Yorker, born and raised in the Lower East Side. And I'm always even more grateful that I can raise my 4 kids in this neighborhood because by way of gentrification, that is not the case. Currently, I am the president of the Community Education Council for School District 1, which encompasses the Lower East Side and the East Village. Having been born and raised in this community, I know my community very well. My friends, the few that are left here, our parents here, and I have a well-networked, established relationships with the community-based organizations that we have that have been running for over 120 years in this neighborhood, servicing low-income families and immigrant families. And during this time of complete unrest, because it's not just civil unrest, it's like complete economic and personal unrest for a lot of people, I think our roles have evolved. All of us on this call are community organizers in many different ways. But the sense of urgency of action has, I think, developed in a way where the days of us opting into which way we want to advocate is no longer. We have reinvented the way that we have to lift our voices to help those who are in dire need, which is a lot of communities of color, which is all the communities of color, but a lot of more New Yorkers who are low income and in poverty.
So I think that this is a moment when the world is cracked wide open, right? When, we can really either seek to return to a world where Black folks, brown folks, poor folks, indigenous folks continue to experience the kind of oppression that we experienced prior to the health pandemic, right? We can seek to return to another pandemic, right, that we lived under constantly, or we can usher in new visions of the world. We can engage our radical imaginations. And I think that, when we think about the murder of George Floyd and the uprisings that came as a result of the theft of his life, but also in honoring his tremendous spirit, really what we see is a desire, I think, among many folks to say that we are not going to go back to business as usual. And we're also not going to waste time tinkering around the edges of systems that were intentionally and deliberately designed to produce the outcomes that they do, right? So it's not accidental that George Floyd and that Black people more broadly, George Floyd represents a tremendous last straw on the camel's back, right? And I think it's really important that we think about what that means. So I think for many of us, as we witnessed Derek Chauvin, the murderous officer who stole the life of George Floyd, kind of invoke the most evil and horrific of his forebears, right? You could see when we say that police evolved from slave catching, you could see his slave catcher forebears in his eyes, right? You could see it in his actions. And I think that for many of us, we said enough with the tinkering around the edges, enough with this rhetoric of police reform. It's time for us to fundamentally transform systems into ones that actually work for us in the name of George Floyd and in the name of Breonna Taylor. And I'm in Los Angeles, so in the name of Waukesha Wilson and Kenneth Ross Jr. and AJ Weber and so many others, we have to transform systems, and we have to, as ridiculous as it would sound to say, let's reform the system of chattel slavery. If policing evolves from the system of slave catching, which is an arm, is a vestige of chattel slavery, then we also have to say the same thing that we said about abolishing chattel slavery. We have to be willing to abolish policing as we know it. And so I think that this moment is a moment when we have an opportunity to fundamentally reimagine public safety, reimagine a world, and imagine a world and usher in a world that works for everyone. And I think that that means, undoing policing. In terms of education, it means establishing our educational spaces as ones that are spaces that the first spaces of abolition, right? So police don't belong on our campuses, police don't belong in our schools, and using those resources to really invest in our children, invest in our communities, and build the kind of world that we want to live in.
Yeah, I'll just follow with you. When we talk about reimagining schools, because there's a big push for that. We also talk about defunding police and somewhat reinvesting that money into schools. I'm actually I advocate at this point to not necessarily to reinvest funds into the public school system, particularly the public school system in New York City, because if the public school system, let's say we're a plantation, which is probably not far from that, when we reimagine what schools should be, What we're actually doing is going to the plantation owner and telling him or her what our ideas are, and then that owner is going to still do what he or she wants to do. That's going to be in the best interest of the plantation, not necessarily in the best interest of the children. So until we can reimagine a school system where we have total ownership, then I can see us investing in it. For example, there's a great amount of the funds that go into public schools are going to national book publishers. And these book publishers are publishing textbooks that are furthering supporting the notion, the ideology of white supremacy. And these are the books that our children are being given. These are the books that our children are being told to read. So I see an immediate action would be to divest, not only from police, but divest from these corporations such as the Pearsons of the world and the Huffman, Michelin, all the other book companies that are profiting off of the backs of our children. So reimagining for me takes on a totally different look.
If we were to defund the police and defund the Pentagon, I believe for my community, we could expand pre-K. We could put people in our community in teacher training programs, in principal programs. We could have people that work in institutions of education in our community investing in our community. They live in our community, they get a salary, and they spend their money in our community. What's happening now is people from outside of our community that don't know our community, don't relate to our community, are getting a paycheck, and then we're building their community. So I think that's critical. We have to strengthen our neighborhood schools. We have to have options. We have to eliminate the private schools that are getting public dollars and going into pockets of individuals. So we have to eliminate these profiteering schools. We have to have high schools that provide different career paths for students. Not everybody's going to go into a four-year liberal arts education. Not everybody's going to go to city colleges and get into a program there. Not everybody's going to get into a trades program. So we got to build our schools around what are the interests of the students and their careers.
There is a hope in the vibrant youth leaders that are being born before our very eyes, who are feeling their power and who are not submitting to the world that they've been handed. They are the students that I teach, we teach, and they are leading the way. There is also hope in collective action. We have to seize this moment right now and know that members, coalitions, community organizers, students, grassroots folks are united in power to protect the health and safety, not only of our teachers, our students as well, from COVID-19, and demand the supports our communities need to survive this pandemic. We're talking about paid sick leave for all parents. We're talking about rent and housing support and Medicare for all. Those don't seem like lofty ideas or even radical ones, because we're seeing this in this unprecedented time. We have to use our united power to fight systemic racism and unapologetically say that Black Lives Matter. In this moment of national reckoning, of national rage, we can no longer be silent to this fact. In the context of a pandemic that impacts communities of color disproportionately, our communities need dramatically more in this moment, not less. No issue can be siloed. You can't just reopen schools if it's not safe, if the science doesn't suggest that. Families don't even have decent health care. You can't have thriving school communities if families are kicked out on the streets because they can't even pay rent. It is not going to be business as usual. I'm inspired by the folks out there in the streets and a part of this call, because we've got to have a multiracial response, like an action team that has a call to arms. Like I said, we cannot let up. This is the time to be bold. This is the time to act. And we can do this. We have to continue to show up and show out for our communities, our babies, ourselves. We need to stay in these streets and lift our voices up and demand justice, because this is our moment. It's our moment to be bold. It's our moment to create the world that our students deserve. It is time now for us to come together, united on all fronts, all sector workers coming together to say in one voice that we are not going to stand by. We are not going to be on the sidelines. We are going to be in the middle of this struggle, holding up arms for justice. Thank you.
And that's going to be done right now by Kaji Torre.
Yes. You know, on Jaleel was rearrested after the police after 49 years also. And he was rearrested for they charged him with trying to register to vote, trying to vote. And so he has to go back to court if they keep up the nonsense on November 16th. And they charged him with 3 counts. The first 2 are felonies, and the last one's a misdemeanor. And it's crazy. You know, he signed a paper saying that, you know how when you get out, you sign up for food stamps, you sign up for ID, you sign up for driver's license and things like that.
Right.
And they were all these papers, and he signed them all. You know, so, you know, and so now they're saying that he tried to fraudulently, electronically
say the date
register to
again.
vote.
November 16th, right?
November 16th, Jaleel Mutakim and Rochester Court.
Okay, you heard it right here. Thank y'all for listening. Support Jaleel Mutakim. This was wrong what they did to him. And we give thanks for you all to give in this report and sign in and listen and pledge for people's strike.
Yes.
Love for the people, love for people means non-stop struggle against imperialism. That's from my good comrade, friend, brother, David Gilbert. I appreciate him writing this and you allowing me to read it for him. All power to the people.
Brother Jihad Abdul Mumit.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. And thank you, Wendy, and my comrade, brother Seiko Odinga. Yeah, again, my name is Jihad Abdul Mumit. I'm the chairperson of the National Jericho Movement, jerichomovement.com, easily accessed on the internet there for more information. And just picking up what my comrade Seiko was saying, moving forward, like what we tried to do is give logistical and direct support to political prisoners in campaigns to get them free from prison. And that's what Seiko was talking about. One of the founders of the Jericho Movement, a brother by the name of Jaleel Abdul Mutakim, who is still incarcerated on his 48th year or so in prison in the state of New York. And was also the co-founders for Safia Bukhari and Herman Ferguson. Both of those dear loved people have passed away since then. but Jericho was started in 1998. But our focus along is to free all political prisoners. And there was a call given by Jalil Abdul King a year or so ago to organize a coalition to try to bring all the wonderful people and organizations that work to free political prisoners and give them support and encouragement in their captivity. He called for a coalition which called in the spirit of Nelson Mandela. And everybody knows Nelson Mandela. He was a champion of the world in South Africa in prison, for 28 or so years in South Africa. And we get much inspiration. So by calling it in the spirit of Nelson Mandela, we're bringing in the realization that we have Nelson Mandela's right here in the shores of the United States of America. One of the things that this coalition is working on is a tribunal, and there's been tribunals before, but this is an international tribunal scheduled for October 2021. I'm glad it's in 2021 because we don't know what the scourge of the COVID-19 pandemic is going to cause on any scheduling. But right now, October 2021. And what we're doing is we're networking and building a network and organizing with other organizations, to bring real charges against the United States with the purpose of getting some resolve, some resolutions across the board nationally, and how we can address these problems, and all the way from mass incarceration to disproportionate rates of people of color in prison, of course, political prisoners and their freedom, decimation of the planet. So those type of crimes, police brutality on blacks, even though the coronavirus pandemic has kind of obscured all other news going on, but it is still going on, in the conditions of poverty and exploitation and marginalization and the lack of medical care and access is still going on in communities across the United States.
Just like you introduced, Wendy, my name is Kenyatta Thompson. I'm a lead community organizer with the Catal Center for Health, Equity, and Justice, working in both Connecticut, where I reside, and New York as well. And so just really briefly, what Catal is for folks who are listening in, we're a community organizing group devoted to developing the leadership of people and building power. Full stop. That's what it is. So prior to COVID hitting, we've been working on a number of different initiatives to ensure that people are released from incarceration and that folks aren't even entering the carceral state at any point. So some of the stuff that we've been doing in New York are trying to get out people who have been incarcerated for technical parole violations. We're trying to do a similar bill in Connecticut to introduce a bill to get people out of incarceration for technical probation and parole violations. We've also done a lot of work to scale back a piece of legislation in Connecticut that criminalizes people for using and selling fentanyl, which we know is another iteration of the drug war. So we've been really trying to get as many people out of incarceration as we can through a number of different initiatives. But since COVID, the big elephant in the room, we've had to really just double down on that work to get as many people out as we can. The latest figures, I think, from the New York Times state that the 10 top places where there are clusters of COVID-19 are happening in prisons and jails throughout the country. We already know that prisons and jails are a public health crisis. You add COVID into that, and the fire gets lit. And no one deserves to die in jail. No one deserves to die in prison. Similarly, no one deserves to die in prison or jail due to COVID-19, but unfortunately, that's what we're seeing. So I just want to share a little bit of what we've been doing in New York and Connecticut, just to let folks know some of the initiatives that we've done. So once COVID really hit, we decided to put out a number of different statements, both in Connecticut and New York. I'll start with New York, though, calling on Governor Cuomo to use his executive power to release as many people as possible. So initially we asked to get people who were medically susceptible for COVID-19, but since then we've changed it just to release as many people as possible, as we're seeing what's happening. If you look at the rate on Rikers, that has some of the highest rates of positive COVID cases, more than any other place in the state. So Governor Cuomo said that he would release at least 1,100 people, so 1,100 people. He said that in late March. As of earlier this month, April 10th, half of the number of people that he was supposed to release on Rikers had been released.
Our efforts. I'm here on the Pine Ridge Reservation, the site of an ongoing COINTELPRO massacre that COINTELPRO has never been held accountable for the 69 admitted uninvestigated murders during the years of in the 70s, between 70, maybe 71, 72, all the way to 19 themselves Black Americans or whatever labels are being used to identify that oppressed demographic that is thankfully still increasingly strengthening all aspects of a movement toward justice. You know, right on Pine Ridge here is where Leonard Peltier and my family members defended themselves. You know, you take a look at how COINTELPRO operates, and they usually send in somebody that they predetermined that they're going to martyr. And so, I just want to set the stage and give people a brief idea that not a lot has changed, except for the fact that, we all have we have not had our own truth and reconciliation hearings here on the Pine Ridge Reservation, because we were the subject of an operation to cause us to spill each other's blood and to create these blood feuds that really we haven't talked about them here yet. And I've only been living here for 2 years. Like the bio said, I grew up on the Standing Rock Reservation, and that's where I kind of got my introduction to political imprisonment. Now, I don't think that there's any imprisonment that's really not political.
This is a poem by Marilyn Buck. It's titled Black August, 2000. Would you hang on cliff's edge, sword sharp, slashing fingers while jackboot screws stomp heels on peeled flesh bones and laugh? Let go, die, damn you, die. Could you hang on 20 years, 30 years, 20 years, 30 years and more? Brave Black brothers buried in US concentration camps, they hang on. Black light shining in torture chambers. Michelle, Yogi, Sondea, Sondeata, Shakur, Warren, Chip, Seth, Herman, Jalil, and more they resist. Black August. Nat Turner, insurrection chief, executed. Black August. Jonathan, George, dead in battle's light. Black August. Fred Hampton, Black Panthers, African Brotherhood, murdered. Black August. Wazi Balakun, Nu Adul Geyang, captured warriors, dead. Black August. Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Ella Baker, Ida B. Wells, Queen Mother Moore, their last breaths drawn fighting death. Black August. Black August, watchword for Black liberation, for human liberation, sword to sever the shackles, light to lead children of every nation to safety. Black August, remembrance, resist the American nightmare.